Hey guys, tonight we're stepping softly into a world that's candlelit, corseted, and just a little bit sleepless. It's the Victorian era, where street lamps hiss with gas, the clocks tick too loudly, and the silence after sunset is never quite peaceful. You find yourself in a creaky London townhouse, or maybe a foggy Edinburgh flat. Your window rattles in the wind. You're lying stiffly beneath layers of itchy wool blankets, staring at a cracked ceiling, wondering why you can't just fall asleep. Everyone seems to have a solution, and most of them sound worse than the problem. Weighted sandbags across your chest? Sure. Opium drops laced with mercury? Why not? A soothing feather pillow stuffed with dried cabbage? Naturally. Sleep in the 1800s wasn't just a biological need. It was a moral imperative, a medical battleground, and for some Victorians, an outright obsession. And the weirder the cure, the more respectable it often sounded. You probably won't survive this timeline without a bit of side-eye and sarcasm. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, post your location and what time it is for you right now. I always love seeing where in the world you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stir in your sheets, turn onto your side, and begin to notice the thrum of the world outside. Horses clopping over cobblestones, maybe, or the faint creak of a gas lamp being extinguished. It's the 1880s, and Victorian Britain is entering its final decades. Queen Victoria, that stately sleep-deprived monarch, still rules. But the world is changing. Faster trains, faster letters, faster expectations. And sleep? It's getting harder and harder to come by. You wouldn't be alone in your wakefulness. Insomnia became, strangely enough, a badge of modernity. Doctors called it neurasthenia when they didn't know what else to call it. Clerks, writers, sensitive housewives, they were all overstimulated, suffering from the rapidity of progress and the sheer exhaustion of being alive. You reach for a lamp. It hisses gently as you twist the knob. Flickering gaslight fills the room. It smells faintly of iron and something medicinal. Outside, someone sneezes, probably from the coal dust. Victorian medicine didn't understand sleep the way we do today. The body was a system of humors, pressures, vibrations, and nerves. If you couldn't sleep, maybe your stomach was too hot, or your liver too cold. Maybe your nervous system was overstimulated from reading too many letters. Or, as one popular belief held, your bed faced the wrong compass direction, causing your natural magnetic fluids to misalign. Historians still argue whether insomnia rates truly rose during the 19th century, or whether people simply began noticing and talking about their sleeplessness more. But talk they did. Advice columns, health manuals, physicians, priests, everyone had opinions. So many opinions. Almost none of them worked. You swing your feet to the floor and begin wandering your Victorian flat. It's surprisingly cold. Heat wasn't consistent after sundown unless you were rich or had a maid with insomnia too. Most bedrooms were lit by a single candle or a small oil lamp. You fumble through your things, looking for something, anything, that might help you drift off. A sleep aid, a warm drink, a second blanket that doesn't smell like your great-uncle's feet. In one corner, there's a stack of dusty pamphlets. Dr. Bramble's Method for Nocturnal Tranquility, The Nerve Soother's Almanac, on the moral management of wakefulness. You flip through one. Apparently, the first step is humility. A man must admit his restlessness before he may correct it. Right. That helps a lot. The second step involves soaking your feet in cold water while sitting on a hard wooden chair and reciting calming verses. Doesn't specify the verses, unfortunately. You sigh. Nearby, your neighbor coughs. Again. You know she's trying one of those new hygienic sleep programs, sleeping with her windows wide open, regardless of the temperature. This is based on the idea that pure, cold air brings moral cleanliness. Her lips are probably blue. But hey, at least she's morally superior. Back in your own room, you try rearranging the pillows. One's too high. One's suspiciously lumpy. You lie back down. The ceiling cracks look vaguely like maps. If you squint, one might be the coastline of France. Maybe that one's the Nile River, or possibly just water damage. It's hard to tell. You begin to wonder how anyone got rest back then. The noises, the anxieties, the sheer number of wool garments. And under all that, a creeping fear that sleeplessness meant something more than tiredness. Maybe it meant weakness, fragility, a flawed constitution. Doctors of the day, many of them with dubious credentials and impressive sideburns, treated sleep as both medical and moral terrain. Good sleep was a sign of a good person. Restless sleep? A mark of nerves, or worse, degeneracy. One London physician suggested a course of abstinence, prayer, and gentle gardening. Another believed vigorous bed-making was the key to slumber. Yet another recommended brushing your hair 100 times before bed to calm the cranial vibrations. You wonder for a moment how many of those people actually slept. You blow out the lamp. The room plunges back into darkness. Somewhere nearby, a cat yowls, probably stuck on a rooftop again. Sleep feels far away. But at least you're not alone. Thousands of Victorians across the cities and countryside are lying awake too. Some are sipping hot milk. Some are praying. Some are about to smear goose fat on their eyelids because an ant swore by it. All of them, like you, just want the same thing: to close their eyes and slip gently out of the world for a while. But unfortunately for them, and for you, the journey's just beginning. You roll over in bed again, staring up at that ceiling map of imaginary rivers and nations, and decide, fine, maybe the pamphlet was onto something. You shuffle over to the trunk by your dresser, rummaging past thick wool socks and stiff collars until your hand brushes against something heavy. A cloth bundle tied with a bit of twine. You lift it out, and oof, it's dense. You untie it and find yourself staring at one of the oddest Victorian contraptions to ever grace a bedroom: the sleep sandbag. This isn't a dainty pouch of lavender. It's a full-on, canvas-wrapped slab of gravel, designed to be laid across your chest while you sleep, as if you were being gently crushed by your own regrets. Supposedly, the pressure calms the nervous system. You lie back, ease the bag onto your torso, and try not to laugh or suffocate. Victorian doctors swore by the principle of compressive rest. They believed that gently pressing down on the abdomen or chest could pacify overactive nerves, slow the pulse, and lead to peaceful slumber. Weighted blankets today? Oh yes, these are their ancestors. But instead of soft, quilted layers, you've got a reusable sack of stones on your ribcage. One enthusiastic writer claimed, "The sensation is akin to being held in the arms of logic itself." That logic is debatable. Historians still argue whether these heavy objects actually helped, or simply gave the sleepless something to focus on besides their racing thoughts. There's also the fact that many of these devices were marketed toward women, thought to be especially prone to hysteria and emotional instability. One mid-century guidebook for young wives suggested tying a flat iron inside a flannel cloth and placing it atop the abdomen to quiet wandering wombs. Yes, you heard that right. A heated iron on your stomach for bedtime. The Victorians had a deep mistrust of the unrestrained body. The idea that you might flop around freely while sleeping horrified many. So they came up with tools to keep you still. Iron corsets, originally used to correct posture or scoliosis, were sometimes worn at night, especially by teenage girls, to ensure straight sleeping and moral uprightness. Imagine trying to drift off while encased in rigid metal bars, your lungs barely expanding, your body fighting the bed. You shift a little under your own modern blanket, grateful that it doesn't creak when you breathe. Another method involved wrapping the sleeper in tight bands of linen or wool, like a low-budget mummy. This was called swaddling for adults in some households, and therapeutic encasement in others. There's something undeniably funny about a grown man voluntarily tying his own legs together in hopes of catching a few hours of sleep. In some cases, heavy wooden boards were placed across the legs, weighted down by bricks. This was to prevent nocturnal fidgeting, which Victorian doctors believed could contribute to melancholy and indigestion. Can't wiggle, can't worry. And then there were the sleep jackets, elaborate garments fastened at the back to keep arms immobile. Think straight jacket, but flannel, and marketed with words like comfort and propriety. Many included little pouches sewn into the shoulders where you could insert small lead weights to make sure your posture remained civilized even while unconscious. You shift in your imaginary Victorian bed, trying to imagine sleeping without turning, without lifting an arm, without pulling up a knee or rearranging a pillow. The stillness would drive you mad before the insomnia did. Some families went a step further and customized their furniture. Special cradles were built for adults, literal wooden cradles that rocked gently through the night. In theory, the soothing motion mimicked the experience of being a baby again. In practice, many creaked unbearably or rocked you right onto the floor. And yes, you could buy straps that attached to the bed frame and looped over your body, gently cinching you down. The goal? Contain the soul's mischief, as one pamphlet put it. That pamphlet also encouraged bedtime prayers repeated rhythmically, not to please God, but to lull the mind through repetition. You stretch your legs under the covers now and give thanks that your mattress isn't propped at a 30-degree angle because that was a thing, too. Tilted beds were believed to encourage digestion, improve lung function, and drain bad humors. Whether that's true or not, historians still debate. But Victorians sure loved putting bricks under things. There's something oddly tender, though, about these efforts. For all the strangeness, the weights, the straps, the corsets, there's a sincere longing underneath. These people wanted sleep, desperately. They wanted quiet minds and gentle rest. They just didn't have the neuroscience or the Netflix to unwind. So instead, they strapped themselves down. They layered fabric upon fabric. They submitted to stillness, believing that If they could just hold still long enough, maybe the dreams would come. You look at the sandbag on your chest again. It's kind of warm now. The weight is oddly comforting in a "this might collapse my lungs" sort of way. You imagine yourself drifting off like this, pinned and breathless, but finally, blessedly unconscious. Then the gaslight flares in the corner, making a soft popping sound. Your neighbor is awake again, probably reading medical leaflets by candlelight. Somewhere nearby, a carriage rattles by. The city never fully sleeps, even when you do. And so you lie there, in the flickering dark, and wonder what other tricks this sleepless age might offer. You're still awake, of course. It's somewhere between midnight and "are those birds chirping?" And the sandbag experiment has become a bit much. You push it aside gently. It lands on the floor with a solid thud, and sigh. Time to try something else. You throw on a scratchy dressing gown, shuffle down the narrow stairs of your imagined Victorian home, and into the street lamp-lit fog of the city night. You're not alone. Someone's up with a baby 2 doors down, and across the road there's a flicker of candlelight in a window. Another wakeful soul. But you have a destination. The local apothecary. The shop is still open. Some were, even at odd hours, and the bell over the door jingles softly as you enter. It smells of camphor, dust, and something vaguely spicy. Glass bottles line the walls, filled with mysterious liquids in fading amber, green, and rose-colored hues. Behind the counter stands a man with a magnificent mustache and slightly stained fingers. He greets you not with surprise, but a knowing nod. "Insomnia?" he asks, as if that's the only possible reason for a late-night visit. You nod, rubbing one temple. "Well, let's see what we've got." He starts pulling bottles. One labeled laudanum, another tincture of opium, another, oddly specific, Mrs. Pritchard's cordial for the overwrought and light-sensitive. He unscrews a stopper and offers a cautious sniff. It smells like something between burnt raisins and regret. Yes, this is what passed for sleep aids in the 19th century. Victorians had an absolutely cozy relationship with opiates. Laudanum, a mixture of opium and alcohol, was sold everywhere. In pharmacies, general stores, and sometimes even by mail. It was prescribed for everything: coughs, cramps, melancholia, and, of course, insomnia. You take the little brown bottle and imagine yourself back in your bedroom, pouring out a teaspoon into a porcelain cup. It tastes like syrup and something ancient. Within minutes, your limbs feel heavy. Your thoughts start to loosen. Sleep doesn't come, but you no longer care that it hasn't. Historians still argue whether most Victorians understood how dangerous opium was. Some scholars suggest the average person had no idea what they were ingesting beyond a strong but helpful medicine. Others argue the signs were obvious. Addiction was rampant, but not always recognized as such. Your chemist also offers chloral hydrate, a newer compound around the 1870s, often added to hot cocoa to knock patients out for the night. Its nickname? Knockout drops. You don't ask what's in it. You probably don't want to know. Then there's bromide of potassium. Sounds fancy. Tastes like licking a rock. Doctors claimed it soothed the nerves and was especially effective on anxious bachelors, hysterical spinsters, and boys who read too many penny dreadfuls. Fun fact: bromide would later be banned in many countries for causing memory problems, skin eruptions, and something euphemistically called general decline. And yet, These concoctions were normal. Entire families used them. Even children were dosed with a little opium syrup when they couldn't sleep or wouldn't stop crying. God help you if you were teething in 1881. There were name-brand versions too. Godfrey's Cordial, Dalby's Carminative, Mrs. Winslow's Soothing Syrup, which sounds gentle until you realize it was basically sugar, alcohol, and opium. The label said soothing, not non-lethal. You sip your imaginary dose and glance at the mirror. Your eyes are glassy now. Your shoulders slump. Still not sleepy, though. The chemist, ever helpful, slides a small box toward you. Inside, sleeping pills. One of the first commercially available types. They're chalky, round, and suspiciously crumbly. May cause mild delirium, the label says in tiny letters. You pocket them for later. You thank the chemist and step back out into the night, the bottle wrapped in brown paper, still warm from your hand. The fog is thicker now. It wraps around the lampposts like a scarf. Somewhere nearby, a pub is closing. You hear laughter, then coughing. Back in your room, you place the bottle on your nightstand, next to a dusty porcelain cup and a single candlestick. You lie back down. Your heart is slower now. Your thoughts feel syrupy, as if they're trying to run underwater. Still, the sleep doesn't come. And this was the real problem. Victorians wanted so badly to fix sleeplessness that they threw chemicals at it long before they understood the consequences. Many became dependent. Some developed odd behaviors, sleepwalking, wild dreams, mood swings, and yet the bottles kept selling. Doctors often argued about dosage. Some swore by just a drop on the tongue. Others instructed half a teaspoon every hour until drowsy, which could mean 4 teaspoons, or 8, or, well, you get the idea. There were efforts to regulate eventually. Toward the end of the century, some towns began requiring prescriptions for stronger opiates. But that didn't stop street sales, traveling tonic vendors, or the ever-charming medicated chocolate pellets you could buy in a railway station vending machine. You pull the blanket to your chin. You've tried the sandbag, the corset. Now the opium's swimming gently in your veins. And still, your eyes are open. You begin to wonder. Maybe the problem isn't your nerves. Maybe it's the era itself. The gaslight flickering too loudly. The neighbors coughing. The books telling you to earn your sleep with righteousness. It's a heavy time to be alive, and an even heavier one to rest in. But you're not alone. All across Britain, others lie in their beds, stomachs full of syrup, brains tangled in quiet panic. The night stretches on, long and humid. The air doesn't move, and even the dreams, when they come, feel borrowed. You turn to one side. The bottle on the nightstand reflects a sliver of candlelight. You'll try again, because you always do. The opium hasn't helped much. You're still wide awake, eyes fixed on the shadow dances your curtains are performing under the faint sway of a summer breeze. You consider. Maybe it's not what's inside you that's broken. Maybe it's what's outside. Maybe you just need to sweat the sleeplessness out. That's how you end up back downstairs, donning your walking boots and heading toward the neighborhood Turkish bath. Yes, at 1 in the morning. Some of these establishments were open late. And if you belonged to a certain social circle, or simply had a subscription, you could step inside for a steamy, soporific session any time your nerves refused to quiet down. The air in the bathhouse hits you like a wall, moist, thick, laced with eucalyptus, lime, and the sour tang of other people's regrets. You hand over a coin, nod at the sleepy attendant, and are ushered into the first chamber, a warm room meant to ease you into the ritual. Victorians loved their steam, not just for cleaning, but for healing. Steam was seen as restorative, balancing, and most importantly, draining. If your body was restless, maybe it was full of misdirected energy. The solution? Perspiration. Lots of it. You loosen your collar and sit on a wooden bench. Somewhere nearby, someone is snoring, already halfway to their goal. These bathhouses were inspired by Ottoman and Roman traditions, repackaged for British tastes. In the 1850s, health reformers like David Urquhart promoted them as not just hygienic marvels, but spiritual ones. A proper sweat, they said, could do everything from cure the common cold to deliver you gently into dreamland. Of course, there were skeptics. Historians still debate whether these late-night baths were more about actual health or the Victorian penchant for ritualized discomfort. Some people just liked the drama of it all. The towels, the tiles, the hissing steam pipes, the vaguely religious sense of purification through suffering. You shuffle into the next room. Hotter now. Your skin prickles. You begin to sweat behind your ears. Steam cabinets became another popular invention. These were personal wooden boxes that enveloped the body from the neck down. You'd sit on a small stool, close the cabinet around your shoulders, and then, poof, a jet of herbal steam would shoot up from below. You were now a sweaty head on a sauna-shaped pedestal. Sleep clinics claimed the cabinets would soften the nerves, and pamphlets boasted testimonials like, "My wife, having endured 14 nights of cursed restlessness, did submit to the steam box and was thereafter as docile as milk." It wasn't just the warmth, it was the process, the slowness, the ritual, the sense that your body was being worked on. Victorian insomnia was never just about not sleeping. It was about what that sleeplessness symbolized: imbalance, anxiety, poor discipline. Steam, like many of their cures, promised to reset the self. You're fully sweating now. Your arms glisten, your neck tingles, and there's a strange satisfaction in the way your wool socks have begun to feel like damp sponges. Another bather leans over and whispers that the eucalyptus infusion helps purge nighttime poisons. You nod, not really knowing what that means. There were other steamy solutions, too. Some households installed sleep ovens, small, fire-heated foot chambers placed under the bed to warm the sheets from below. These often smoked. Some caught fire. One 1872 pamphlet noted that mild discomfort is expected, which is very on brand for the era. And for the adventurous, mustard baths. You'd sit in a tub filled with hot water and ground mustard seed. This was said to draw heat toward the skin, away from the brain, and thus help cool the mental furnaces that kept you awake. Of course, you'd smell like a sandwich after. There was even a brief fad for sleep sweats, a home remedy involving layering the sleeper in flannel, wool, oilcloth, and sometimes even wax paper to induce an overnight sweating session. The goal? Wake up clean, empty, and, ideally, rested. Often, patients just woke up soaked and angry. You towel off now, leaving the bathhouse behind. Your pores are open. Your limbs feel like noodles. You return to your little Victorian room with its ticking clock and damp bedding, and collapse into bed. Slightly steamed and vaguely hopeful. But sleep? Still elusive. You realize now it wasn't just about medicine or rituals, it was about distraction. These people were doing things to convince themselves they were being proactive. If you can't sleep, at least you can try. And try they did. With herbs, with baths, with boiling mustard in buckets. Some doctors even recommended sleep marches, long walks at night, preferably in silence, wearing a scarf over the mouth to warm the air. If you got tired enough, they said, the body would surrender. You close your eyes and imagine the night air on your face, your boots tapping gently along a cobbled lane, each step carrying you closer to unconsciousness. The bath didn't work, but you feel quieter, lighter. For now, that's something. You're dry again now, though your sheets are still a little clammy from the steam bath misadventure. The fire in the grate has dimmed to a faint orange glow, and the sounds outside your window have settled into a sleepy hush. Just the occasional click of a horse hoof, or the far-off rustle of someone else's laundry flapping in the dark. You're hungry, just a little. And of course, Victorians had something to say about that too. You slide out of bed, tiptoe toward your humble kitchen nook, and fumble for a kettle. Maybe, just maybe, one of those old food-based folk remedies will be the thing that finally nudges you into slumber. Victorians had a whole menu of what we might call soporific stews, things to simmer, things to nibble, things that sounded vaguely nutritious, but mostly just gave the mouth something to do while the mind spiraled. You light a small gas stove and reach for what's available. Lettuce. Yes, that's right. Victorians believed that boiled lettuce could help you sleep. Not in a salad. Not even lightly steamed. We're talking full-on lettuce broth. A soft, pale green soup of wilted leaves and warm water. Supposedly calming, mildly bitter, better with a splash of milk or a pinch of nutmeg. You pour it into a cracked porcelain mug and sip. It tastes like sleep, if sleep was slightly disappointing and smelled of wet garden. But there's a kind of comfort in it, too. Historians still argue whether lettuce has actual sedative properties. It contains lactucarium, a milky fluid in the stems that was once dubbed lettuce opium. Though nowhere near as strong as the real thing, it gave Victorian naturalists hope, a gentle, botanical way to doze off. Just ignore the sogginess. Another household favorite, warm milk with vinegar. The curdling is intentional. It was thought that the sourness settled the stomach and quieted the mind. A happy gut, after all, was believed to produce a happy brain. You sniff the milk in your imaginary kitchen and, no, not tonight. There were more palatable options too. Nutmeg stirred into ale. Thin barley gruel with sugar. Mashed bananas, if you were rich enough to own bananas, mixed with cinnamon and taken just before bed. Caraway seed cakes were popular among the more fashionable, as were mild teas brewed from chamomile, fennel, or even burnt orange peels. You try one, fennel. It smells like licorice and disappointment. Still, it's calming in its way. The act of preparing it, waiting for the steam, feeling the warmth in your hands, it's a distraction. Maybe that's all half of these remedies were ever meant to be. Another curious belief? Don't eat meat too late in the evening. Some guides insisted it would heat the blood and inflame the animal passions. Others believed that red meat made the brain work too hard during digestion, causing dreams, or worse, philosophical insomnia. You can't be pondering the universe on a stomach full of pork, after all. You finish your mug and stare at your small counter. There's a slice of brown bread with a thin smear of treacle left over from earlier. That's another old trick. A spoonful of molasses, taken slowly, believed to be grounding. Whether that's literal or not is unclear, but in an era before chocolate became widely available, treacle was the poor man's comfort food. Some households also believed in what was called a sleep nibble, just a bite of something sweet before lying down. It could be a fig, a sugar biscuit, or even candied rose petals. These were supposed to charm the tongue into rest, which frankly sounds lovely, if a bit poetic for dried flowers. And then there was the vinegar cure. Yes, vinegar. A few tablespoons stirred into warm water and drunk slowly, believed to cut through mental fog and settle the brain's electrical humors. One particularly bold pamphlet claimed that vinegar could reset the temperament if taken while barefoot. You decline to try that one, mostly on principle. You wrap yourself in a shawl and bring your cup back to the bedroom. A few crumbs fall on the blanket. You don't care. The city is quieter now, but your mind still hums. It's that strange, exhausted alertness that feels more like being underwater than being awake. Your body is ready to sleep. Your brain just hasn't gotten the message. So you try one last trick, one your aunt once swore by, swallowing a piece of dry bread and counting backward from 200. Supposedly, the combination of chewing and counting distracted both body and mind long enough to let sleep sneak in unnoticed. 200. 199. 198. Still here. Still wide-eyed. You think, maybe, you should have added more treacle. The crumbs are still in your bed. They've nestled into the sheets like tiny reminders that even your most soothing rituals come with irritating consequences. But you're committed now. Sleep still hasn't found you, so you begin to wonder if it's time to go deeper. Not just into your sheets, but into the mind itself. After all, what if sleep is not a matter of digestion or steam or lettuce? What if it's mental? Victorians, ever obsessed with the inner workings of the human spirit, certainly thought so, which is why, if you lived in a respectable part of town and had the means, or at least the desperation, you might have paid a visit to a hypnotist, or, as they were often called then, mesmerists. The concept of hypnotism wasn't invented by the Victorians, but they certainly gave it flair. Picture yourself seated in a dim, velvet-draped parlor. A man with dramatically curled facial hair and a voice like treacle gently waves a pocket watch in front of your face. It swings like a slow pendulum. You stare. He murmurs soothing nonsense in a syrupy cadence. You are growing drowsy. Very drowsy. And, frankly, you might be. Not because he's rewiring your subconscious, but because the whole performance is just that exhausting. Back then, sleep hypnosis wasn't just a party trick. It was a bona fide medical suggestion. Victorians believed that hypnotism could untangle the nerves, reset an overstimulated mind, and return the body to its proper rhythms. Of course, whether it worked was hotly debated. Historians still argue whether most of these patients were genuinely hypnotized or just deeply embarrassed and willing to pretend. The theory went something like this. Insomnia was often the result of mental congestion, too many thoughts clogging the brain, like bad plumbing. Hypnotism, in the hands of a practiced gentleman or lady mesmerist, could redirect that flow. Sometimes, the hypnotist would suggest dreams, or implant images of waves. or command the body to forget it was tired and just sleep. But hypnotism wasn't the only head game in town. There was also animal magnetism. Now, despite the name, this has nothing to do with petting a sleepy dog. Instead, it was a belief, first pushed by Franz Mesmer, the spiritual godfather of hypnotism, that an invisible magnetic fluid coursed through living beings. Illness, including insomnia, came from blockages in this fluid. And sleep? That was your body's way of recalibrating its internal magnetism. You, lounging in your sleepless state, might have been prescribed passes, a sort of slow, deliberate hand motion waved across your face or limbs. Supposedly, this guided the magnetic fluid. You could go to a parlor for it or have someone perform it at home, which, to be honest, sounds like a slightly overcomplicated massage. But the Victorians were nothing if not creative. Soon, amateur healers began combining hypnotism, magnetism, and even early psychology into their insomnia practice. One lesser-known figure, a Dr. James Esdaile, claimed he could put patients into a mesmeric coma, so deep they wouldn't even flinch during surgery. And yes, he meant that literally. He once amputated limbs while patients were under mesmeric sleep. Whether this actually happened the way he described is debatable. Extremely debatable. You roll over in bed, trying to imagine someone gently massaging your aura into unconsciousness. It doesn't seem practical, but maybe, just maybe, there's something to the rhythm of it. That steady back and forth, the soft tone, the predictability of a whispered voice. In fact, that's exactly what led to another quirky Victorian favorite, the talking cure. This was less a treatment and more a bedtime service. You'd pay someone, usually a family member, sometimes a stranger, to sit beside your bed and talk in a low, monotone voice. The topic didn't matter. It could be weather patterns or a grocery list, as long as it was steady and boring, which, oddly enough, feels very familiar now, doesn't it? Victorians believed that the brain, overstimulated by city noise and gaslights and social obligations, simply needed a distraction, something dull, repetitive, and slightly soothing. A word lullaby. You might even drift off imagining that voice now. The barometer fell 2 degrees by noon. The potatoes were slightly undercooked. Miss Weatherby wore lavender lace. Still awake? No worries. There's one more fringe remedy you haven't tried yet. The use of mirrors. Yes, mirrors. Some Victorian mystics believed that gazing into a mirror by candlelight could lull you into sleep, especially if you did it in silence. This wasn't about vanity. The theory was that your reflection, when dimly lit and gently moving with the candle's flicker, could mesmerize the brain into stillness. The self watching the self until both selves agreed to power down. Of course, if your room's too drafty, that flicker becomes a horror show. Many a sleepless Victorian abandoned this method after convincing themselves they saw a ghostly shadow, or worse, their reflection blinking independently, which is not sleep-inducing. Still, the candlelight does have a certain charm. You blow one out now and let the warm scent of wax drift toward the ceiling. Maybe none of these mental games will work. Maybe you'll just lie here, remembering the voice of the mesmerist or the magnetic flutter of a hand above your forehead. But there's something oddly comforting about knowing they tried. That across time, in homes and parlors and cramped boarding houses, people stared at the ceiling with the same tired hope. You roll over again. Let's see what your reflection thinks about all this. The reflection isn't much help. It stares back, candlelight warping your features just enough to make everything feel a little off. Like you've entered some other version of yourself, a sleep-starved twin still hoping the mirror holds answers. Victorians, for all their rigidity, were willing to entertain such possibilities, especially when science and superstition started holding hands. And nowhere was that courtship more romantic or more chaotic than in the rise of electrical cures. Yes, electricity, as in literal shocks to the system. Imagine this. You, wrapped in your dressing gown, guided into a small chamber filled with odd brass contraptions, cloth-covered wires, and an air that crackles faintly. The doctor, more tinker than physician, has you sit on a wooden stool while he explains, in a confident tone, that your sleeplessness is due to an electrical imbalance. Not enough juice in your nerves. A depleted battery of the soul. And what's the solution? Why, a mild dose of galvanism, of course. You nod nervously, even as he straps 2 electrodes to your temples and turns a tiny crank. It tingles, then buzzes. Then, whoops, that one stung a little. But it's all in the name of sleep, right? This wasn't a fringe belief. Electrical therapy was seen as the bleeding edge of medical progress. Inspired by Luigi Galvani's 18th-century experiments making frog legs twitch, Victorians believed electricity could restart failing organs, stimulate a sluggish brain, and, if directed just right, coax the body back into healthy rhythms, including sleep. There were entire machines built for it. Some looked like torture devices, others resembled elegant parlor furniture. You could purchase personal electric belts, pillows, even sleep-inducing combs. Yes, combs, which allegedly discharged a faint current through your scalp as you brushed. Historians still argue whether any of these gizmos did more than just provide a placebo effect, or, in some cases, cause migraines. But desperate times made for sparky measures. You might find it hard to believe now, lying safely under your modern duvet, but many Victorians swore by their soothing volts. Some even claimed that nightly zaps helped them dream more vividly or sleep longer without waking. Of course, they also said similar things about cocaine. More on that soon. For now, let's stay wired, just a little, because electricity wasn't the only physical remedy on offer. Victorians also loved weights. Weighted blankets may be all the rage today, but the Victorians had their own version: heavy counterpanes and pressed-down mattress frames. Some doctors even prescribed metal sheets to be laid atop the body, to quiet restless limbs, they claimed. The science was hazy, but the sensation? Grounding. And when you've been tossing all night, even a little downward pressure feels like a hug from the void. Then there was rotational therapy. Yes, that's exactly what it sounds like. Patients were strapped to slowly spinning beds or chairs, devices designed to induce dizziness and eventually sleep. The idea was simple. Spin the body, scramble the thoughts. Your nausea would override your insomnia, and eventually unconsciousness would follow, either from exhaustion or motion sickness. You probably wouldn't survive this one without vomiting. One German asylum doctor proudly described his success in knocking patients out cold via rotational therapy. He claimed it was safe, if carefully timed. Most people disagreed. But if nothing else, it underscored the point. Victorians were willing to go to truly dizzying lengths to chase sleep. And speaking of extreme, we can't skip the use of magnets. Not quite the same as animal magnetism, These were literal magnets, usually sewn into pillowcases or mattress pads. You, ever hopeful, might tuck one beneath your pillow and trust that the Earth's magnetic fields, redirected just right, would gently recalibrate your circadian rhythm. The Victorians didn't fully understand magnetism, but they were fascinated by its invisible power. Then again, they didn't fully understand insomnia either, so they experimented. On themselves, on their children, on the anxious and the elderly and the overly poetic. There was even a brief trend of placing polished crystal orbs under the bed, something about lunar energy, apparently. One newspaper warned that doing so during a full moon could make dreams uncommonly vivid and disturbing. But some believed that was precisely what broke a bad sleep cycle. You wonder how many of these treatments ended in disappointment. Probably all of them. And yet the desire to feel rested, to wake renewed, was so strong that people would allow themselves to be zapped, spun, weighed down, and magnetized. Maybe that desire is what kept the industry thriving. In 1882, one London-based entrepreneur began selling a nocturnal harmonizer, a clockwork box that played gentle humming noises paired with light vibrations. He advertised it as a scientifically balanced lullaby for the nervous elite. It cost the equivalent of 3 months' rent. He sold out in a week. You can almost hear it now. The gentle whir, the strange hum, the imagined relief. Your muscles soften at the idea of someone believing this much in sleep. And let's be honest, aren't we still doing it? Weighted blankets, white noise apps, gentle ASMR videos where people whisper facts about 17th century livestock trends? Hello. All echoes of what came before. All trying, in their own way, to outsmart the body's stubborn refusal to rest. You exhale deeply. If your Victorian self could see you now, cradled in modern comfort, earphones in, phone screen finally dimmed, they might not envy your insomnia, but they'd definitely envy your options. Although they'd probably still offer to hook you up to a galvanic hat. Just in case. Your stomach grumbles slightly, even though you're not hungry. Victorian insomniacs would have seized on that, because another beloved belief of the era was that poor digestion caused poor sleep. A tired gut made a tired mind. So, naturally, people turned to the soothing embrace of one universally beloved ritual, a midnight snack. Well, more like a midnight meal, and not the cozy bowl of cereal or cookie and milk situation you might be imagining. No, Victorians leaned toward soporific suppers. That meant heavy, starchy foods, potato puddings, milk-soaked toast, boiled beef in broth. If it could sit like a stone in your belly, all the better. The logic? The more your digestive system labored, the less your brain would fidget. It's a charmingly backward kind of thinking. Imagine trying to fall asleep while your body frantically processes a late-night mutton pie. Still, some of these habits stuck around. Warm milk, for example, became a classic sleep aid, praised for its calming effect, though historians still argue whether it's the tryptophan or just the cozy association with childhood. Either way, the Victorians would serve it hot, often with nutmeg or cinnamon, and sometimes spiked with a splash of sherry, port, or even brandy. Because, of course, alcohol was another favored remedy. You were expected to drink in moderation, but what that meant varied wildly depending on which doctor or auntie you asked. A sleeping draught might include anything from red wine steeped with poppy seeds to straight gin mixed with laudanum. You'd knock it back just before bed, and then lie there, waiting for the wooziness to win. And win it often did, though not without side effects. Many who tried this approach found themselves waking around 2 a.m., hearts racing, mouth dry, stomach unsettled. That post-alcohol rebound effect. But by then, you'd already dozed for a few hours, which counted as a win in the Victorian sleep ledger. Less common, but no less curious, were culinary sedatives like lettuce water. Yes, lettuce. Not even the flavorful kind. Pale, crunchy, bitter romaine or iceberg would be boiled, the water saved and sipped warm. Why? Because lettuce contains lactucarium, a milky secretion with mild sedative properties. It's no Ambien, but some Victorians claimed it helped dull the edge of racing thoughts. There were also teas. Oh, so many teas. Chamomile, of course. Valerian root, which smells like feet but packs a punch. Lavender infusions. Lemon balm. And passion flower, less known today, but cherished then for its gentle calming effect. You'd sit with your hands curled around a steaming cup, eyelids heavy from the floral steam alone, except sometimes the effect was too gentle, which led to the next category, digestive purging. Yes, we're going there. A stubborn stomach was often blamed for all manner of ailments, including insomnia. So when food didn't help, or made things worse, Victorians would pivot to removal. Enter the ever-charming enema, or, as they preferred to call it, a constitutional encouragement. You'd lie on your side, clutching a tin funnel and tube setup, probably while your maid tried not to make eye contact. The mixture could be plain water, or include herbs like senna or chamomile. You'd wait, then release, and hope, somehow, the cleared pipes would clear your mind. It's absurd. It's uncomfortable. It's 100% historical reality. Modern medicine has mostly thrown this one out, though the detox crowd occasionally resurrects it. But digestion-based insomnia theories didn't stop there. The Victorians also blamed gas, not metaphorically, literally. Trapped wind, they believed, floated upward and pressed on the heart or brain, disturbing both sleep and temperament. Remedies ranged from peppermint lozenges to heated wind pillows. Yes, these existed, to be placed on the abdomen to relax the humors. Historians still argue whether these were just tummy warmers or if some designs secretly released herbal vapors. Either way, it's oddly endearing to imagine someone quietly applying a lavender-scented heat pad in 1889 while muttering about brain gas, and if all else failed, they'd simply stop eating. Fasting was sometimes seen as a spiritual purge, sometimes a medical reset. For insomniacs, the idea was to lighten the system, remove all distractions, all bloating, all potential internal rebellion. But this rarely worked. Hunger kept people awake just as often as heaviness. So the pendulum swung back again, toward warm bread, candied fennel, or yet another milky toddy. Sleep, after all, is a negotiation, and the Victorian gut was a frequent participant. You shift slightly under the covers, half smiling at the thought of someone, long ago, lying in a four-poster bed, whispering to a servant, "Be a dear, and bring me the lettuce water." Because in that moment, they weren't ridiculous. They were simply tired. Tired in the same gnawing, bone-deep way you've felt before. And they were trying to tame their stubborn bodies, trying to outwit the ticking clock, trying to lull their minds into a soft, dark surrender, sometimes with mashed potatoes, sometimes with herbal tinctures, sometimes with an enema tube in the nightstand drawer. They didn't have it all figured out. But then again, neither do we. So tonight, if you find yourself tempted by a second helping of something warm and carby, just tell yourself you're embracing tradition. The long, slightly absurd, wonderfully human tradition of chasing sleep with a spoon in hand. You lie there, eyes heavy now, thinking that maybe, just maybe, you'd survive the mashed potato method. But let's shift slightly, because Victorians didn't just obsess over digestion and drinks. No, they eventually turned their attention to something even stranger: the art of mechanical sleep. You hear a faint creak in your imagination, like the groan of a crankshaft turning. That's because the Industrial Revolution didn't just revolutionize factories, it also inspired a kind of mechanical madness that crept right into the Victorian bedroom. Sleep, they began to believe, could be engineered, literally. So here come the gadgets. Let's start with the rocking bed. You picture it, don't you? A massive, ornate bed frame mounted on curved runners, like an oversized cradle. These were designed for grown adults, and some were hand-rocked by sleepy footmen. Others were powered by clever wind-up cranks. The bed would gently sway, back and forth, hoping to lull the insomniac to sleep the way you'd quiet a colicky baby. It sounds peaceful, until you remember the creak of floorboards and the very real threat of seasickness if the motion was too enthusiastic. Historians still argue whether these beds helped at all, or simply offered the illusion of trying. But they were popular, especially among the upper classes who could afford the sleep machines. And yes, that's what they called them, because some Victorians took the mechanical idea even further. They built full-on contraptions designed to impose sleep through timed routines. Take the wakeful sleeper alarm. It was a wooden box placed beside the bed, with a small metal bell and a candle timer. If you hadn't fallen asleep within an hour of lying down, the mechanism would release a feather duster, gently swiping your face to prompt you to try again. It's kind of like being nagged by your grandmother, in clockwork form. Another popular device? Weighted blankets. Yes, those cozy modern things we now associate with anxiety relief. But in Victorian times, they weren't stuffed with glass beads. They were thick quilts layered with sandbags or padded cotton slabs, meant to press the body into stillness. The pressure was thought to quiet the nerves. It sounds familiar now, but then it was cutting edge. Even weirder was the head suspension cradle. You're going to need to picture this one. You lie flat on your back, and a gently tensioned leather sling holds your head from above, suspended by ropes or wires. The goal? To keep your neck aligned and prevent tossing. But the result? A look somewhere between medical therapy and marionette. Some models came with matching limb supports. Yes, they suspended your arms and legs, too. You're basically floating, loosely trussed like a turkey waiting for its moment. One rogue sneeze, and you're tangled for hours. Then there were the timers. Victorian inventors loved timers. A favorite gadget was the hourglass eye closer. You'd rest a small weighted bar just above your eyes, connected to a descending string. As the sand trickled down, the bar would slowly lower, encouraging your eyelids to follow. Blink, and it would reset itself, like a very judgmental metronome. You weren't just being asked to sleep. You were being trained. Still, some of the tech was surprisingly thoughtful, like the rotating ceiling fans powered by hand cranks, an early version of white noise. or mechanical curtain pullers that slowly dimmed the room as you lay in bed, simulating dusk. One inventor even filed a patent for a sleep helmet lined with lavender satchels and gentle pressure points for the temples. It looked ridiculous, but the intention? Almost poetic. And then there was the vibrating pillow. Oh yes. The idea was simple. Place a ticking mechanical motor inside a down pillow. Let it emit faint rhythmic tremors and hope your brain would sync with the pulses. Think of it as the first sleep app, just powered by gears instead of code. But the real gem? The Somno chair. Part fainting couch, part trap. The Somno chair was a recliner that would slowly tip backward over the course of 20 minutes, moving you from upright to fully prone. It had adjustable cushions for spinal alignment, optional weights for muscle pressure, and, this is not a joke, a built-in music box that played lullabies. One problem, it made escape difficult. You couldn't just jump out of a Somno chair, you had to crank yourself back up or call for help, which, to be fair, probably did discourage midnight snacking. The Victorian faith in these gadgets was intense. Sleep was not just rest, it was a puzzle, a code. And with the right springs, levers, and knobs, surely someone could crack it. And some swore they did. Pamphlets from the time are full of glowing testimonials. I haven't dreamt of widows chasing me in weeks. Or, no more nighttime anxiety, thanks to the feather duster bell. Glorious nonsense. But let's not laugh too hard. Modern sleep tech isn't so different. White noise machines, smart mattresses, ring trackers that monitor your REM cycles, eye masks with Bluetooth speakers, guided meditations narrated by British celebrities. All modern versions of the same desperate hope. Maybe this gadget will finally shut off my brain. Because while insomnia looks different now, its core remains unchanged. We still fidget in the dark, still chase rest like a moving target, still invest in machines that promise to fix something so achingly human. So, as you lie here listening, maybe beneath your own weighted blanket, remember those rocking beds and candle timers. They may have been loud, ridiculous, ineffective, but they were born from the same soft ache that lives in all of us, the deep, unspoken wish to just, finally, sleep. You're barely hanging on now, eyelids heavier than Victorian upholstery, but the story lurches forward like a mechanical bed on tired hinges. Because while some Victorians trusted gadgets, others leaned hard into the invisible, into magnets, phrenology, and, of course, electricity. Yes, sleep by current. It's as mad as it sounds. Let's begin with magnetism. In the mid-1800s, an entire pseudo-medical industry sprang up around the idea that animal magnetism, a mysterious life force running through your body, could be manipulated to restore balance, calm the nerves, and cure sleeplessness. This wasn't entirely new. The term had been coined by Franz Mesmer decades earlier, and yes, that's where the word mesmerize comes from. Victorian doctors, well, doctors, sold magnetic slippers, magnetic bracelets, even magnetic mattresses. You were encouraged to lie atop them, imagining the invisible energies realigning your internal compass. Some claimed these devices could draw restlessness out of your bones, like a lodestone pulling iron from a wound, or a refrigerator magnet trying its best to perform surgery. Historians still argue whether these practices were earnest experiments or stylish scams. Either way, they were very popular, especially among wealthy insomniacs desperate for non-invasive cures. But magnets weren't enough. No. The Victorians were just beginning to understand electricity, and they couldn't resist running some volts through their sleeplessness. Enter electrotherapy. You blink at the thought, probably harder than the patients did, given their heads were often strapped into brass helmets wired to hand-cranked generators. The theory? That a mild current applied to the scalp or spine could stimulate the sleep nerves and trick the brain into powering down. It sounds futuristic until you realize the equipment looked more like a torture device than a sleep aid. The Pulvermacher chain was one such invention, a set of linked metal coils you wore like a sash across the torso. It claimed to deliver a steady, calming electrical field while you slept. Except, you weren't supposed to sleep in it for more than 3 hours, or while wet, or near anything flammable. But apart from that, sweet dreams. Another brilliant device, the electropathic belt. This gem wrapped around your waist and connected to small battery packs worn like garters. It was marketed not just for sleeplessness, but also for manly vigor, which is Victorian marketing code for, well, let's say it doubled as snake oil with a zipper. You'd sit by candlelight, winding up your electrobelt, hoping the tiny jolts to your lower back would lull you into dreams. Instead, they often triggered panic and muscle spasms. Not ideal. Unless your dream was to simulate being stung by bees before bed. Still, the fascination didn't stop there. Some enterprising souls created electrical pillows, feather cushions lined with copper mesh that promised to stimulate the cranial nerves. These pillows usually came with disclaimers in very small Victorian script, not suitable for epileptics, pets, or individuals with loose dental work. The average lifespan of these inventions was about one good review in the London Illustrated Times, followed by a few lawsuits and a small fire. But perhaps the strangest of all? Phrenological sleep regimens. Phrenology, if you've blissfully forgotten, was the 19th century belief that the shape of your skull determined your personality, your intelligence, and yes, your sleep habits. Practitioners claimed that insomnia stemmed from overdeveloped bumps on certain parts of the cranium. The fix? Gentle nightly tapping with calibrated brass knobs to retrain those areas. Imagine bedtime therapy via head bopping. You'd sit in a quiet room, maybe with a lavender candle burning low, and let a specialist gently prod the back of your skull. 1, 2, 3 taps over the restfulness node, then a few counterclockwise strokes on the dream retention ridge. The method was unscientific, utterly subjective, and extremely relaxing if you didn't mind being treated like a xylophone. You'd be surprised how much sleep science, even today, nods back to this era, though thankfully with fewer knobs and wires. The idea of stimulating the vagus nerve, syncing brain waves, even using low-frequency sound or light patterns, it all echoes what Victorians tried with electric pads and magnetic underpants. And for some, it worked. Or so they believed. And belief, as you now know, is half the battle when chasing sleep. Because that's the thing about these odd therapies. It didn't matter whether the copper wiring did anything, or whether the head tapping really changed skull chemistry. What mattered was that someone cared enough to design a system, a ritual, a structure for rest. Insomnia can feel like chaos, and even a weird ritual is better than that abyss. Still, the dangers were real. Newspapers occasionally ran grim little headlines. Electroman perishes in slumber, or fatal sparks during rest cure. usually accompanied by sketches of wide-eyed men in singed pajamas. But those stories didn't stop the trend. If anything, they fueled it, because mystery sells, and so does desperation. By the 1890s, the electrical sleep market was booming. Shops sold at-home kits with names like Dr. Breen's Night Restorative Crown and The Sleeper's Gauntlet. You'd follow complex instructions involving clock timings, dials, and body placement. One misstep, and you might shock yourself awake instead of drifting off. But if you got it right, well, you'd still probably lie there, staring at the gas lamp shadows, wondering why your ears were buzzing. Still, you keep thinking about that belief, that maybe the currents would fix your nerves, that sleep could be flipped on like a gas switch. And somewhere in all that fire hazard optimism lies the real heart of the Victorian insomnia cure. A mix of science, wishful thinking, and deeply weird bedtime gadgets. So tonight, if your brain won't settle, be grateful you're not wearing an electrified corset or tuning your pillow to the correct frequency. Just breathe, lie still, and let the flickering image of those wired-up Victorians lull you to sleep. Your breath settles now, slower, softer. But the story carries on, because the Victorians weren't just shocking themselves into sleep or swallowing opiates by the spoonful. They also believed their physical environment could either ruin or rescue their rest. So tonight, you find yourself gliding through the shadowy corridors of a very specific movement. The bedroom reform craze. Yes, people once believed the entire architecture of your room might be to blame for your insomnia. That crooked floorboard? That's why you haven't dreamed in weeks. The paint on your walls? Obviously draining your life force. And the wrong kind of pillow? You might as well be lying on a gravestone. Victorians had opinions. So many of them. Let's start with the most popular. Ventilation. Open windows, said the sleep experts of the time, were non-negotiable. You needed air circulation to dispel the foul vapors collecting in your boudoir. Never mind that you lived in London and the air outside smelled like horse sweat and industrial soot. Fresh was fresh, apparently. Doctors insisted that a well-ventilated room could prevent nightmares, melancholia, and sudden nocturnal death. That last one's debatable. But the fear was real enough that people began drilling extra vents into their ceilings, or placing bowls of eucalyptus water near windows to clarify the air. If your curtains moved slightly in the night breeze, that was considered therapeutic. Historians still argue whether this obsession stemmed from actual health improvements or simply a deep paranoia about miasma. Those invisible clouds of disease, they believed, drifted around cities like ghostly soup. Regardless, the advice spread fast. Open those panes. Freeze if you must. But never sleep in stale air. You shiver just thinking about it. Next came bed placement. According to many popular sleep manuals, your bed should never face a mirror. Nor should your feet point toward the door, unless you wanted to invite spirits to carry you out. Sound familiar? That same rule still floats around in feng shui discussions today, though the Victorians had their own flair for drama. And while we're on furniture, no frilly canopies. At least not according to one Dr. Edward Dixon, who warned in his widely read pamphlet that heavy drapes over the bed could trap the night's terrors and suffocate the senses. Poetic, yes. Scientifically accurate? Not so much. But there was more. Oh, so much more. The color of your walls? Crucial. Bright reds and bold purples were said to overstimulate the mind. Sleep manuals advised gentle pastels, powder blue, sage green, or faint fawn, a color that sounds more like an endangered woodland creature than a paint chip. It was believed that soft tones lulled the brain into a calmer frequency, especially when paired with dim, flickering candlelight. You were meant to walk into your bedroom and feel your blood pressure drop, not your jaw from color shock. And yes, they talked about mattresses extensively. Feather beds were seen as both luxurious and dangerous. Too soft, they said. Your spine would curve the wrong way, your lungs would compress, your dreams would collapse under the weight of indulgence. Horsehair was the superior choice, firm, springy, and just textured enough to remind you not to roll over too quickly. One pamphlet even suggested sleeping directly on a wooden plank for 3 nights per fortnight to realign your moral compass. We're not sure how many people actually did this, but the threat of it alone might have cured a few bad dreams. And then there was noise. The Victorians hated noise at night. Bells, carriages, crying infants. Everything was an enemy of rest. Some families stuffed cloth into their keyholes to stop the wind from whistling through. Others installed thick velvet door curtains, called portières, not for fashion, but for muffling sound. But the truly elite? They invested in what were called hush chambers. These were purpose-built sleeping rooms with double walls, wool-lined floors, and doors so thick they resembled castle battlements. A sensory deprivation chamber before the term even existed. One London noblewoman proudly claimed her sleep room was so quiet, I cannot even hear my thoughts misbehave. We're not sure that's a compliment. Meanwhile, those less fortunate had to make do with sleep masks made of cooled porcelain or earplugs fashioned from wax and sheep's wool. If you were very unlucky, a street musician might set up near your window and serenade the block with a cracked fiddle. Which leads us to a slightly tragic fact. Some Victorian city ordinances banned public whistling after midnight. Can you imagine? All of this led to a fascinating irony. The more the Victorians tried to perfect their sleep environment, the more it seemed to elude them. Because when you lie down in a room so carefully curated, walls muted, air fresh, bed facing exactly 37 degrees northeast, you're also acutely aware that failure means you've wasted all that effort. A recipe for anxiety. The very thing they were trying to cure. And still, they pressed on. They stuffed lavender into linen drawers. They carved inscriptions above door frames. Peace be upon this room. They sprinkled blessed salts beneath the floorboards, in case ancient Roman spirits were hiding under the bed. And they hung dream catchers, even if they didn't call them that, from brass hooks beside the gaslight fixtures. The room itself became the doctor. But perhaps the most enduring takeaway was this. They believed sleep could be invited. Not forced, not demanded, but gently ushered in by a careful stage, a soothing scent, a quiet rhythm. So maybe tonight, in your own space, whether it's pristine or cluttered, lavender-scented or lit by phone glow, you take a moment to adjust something. One thing, just to see if your body notices, if sleep feels a little closer. And if it doesn't, at least you didn't have to hammer a new ventilation shaft through your bedroom wall. The air grows still, and your eyes may feel heavier now, but the Victorians aren't quite done offering their sleepless wisdom. If decorating your room like a pastel monastery didn't work, perhaps the fault lies not with your surroundings, but with your thoughts. Tonight, we drift gently into the hush of Victorian mental conditioning, where sleeplessness was viewed as not just a bodily ailment, but a spiritual and emotional one. You're not just awake because of noise or light or a squeaky horsehair mattress. You're awake because you haven't tamed the wild beast of your imagination. And so you learn. Insomnia, in the Victorian mind, was also a moral failing. Let's start with a popular theory of the time: overexcitement of the intellect. According to numerous physicians, including one famously stern Dr. Henry Maudsley, the brain could overheat from too much reading, too much conversation, or, heaven forbid, too many emotional thoughts before bed. If you were lying awake thinking about love, politics, religion, or that awkward comment you made at dinner, you were essentially causing your own brain fever. The cure? Mental stillness. You were advised to empty the mind before sleep. Picture it like this. You are told to imagine your thoughts as racing horses, and your goal is to quietly remove one from the track until the stadium is silent and the hooves no longer echo. If that sounds suspiciously like meditation, you're not wrong. Victorians wouldn't have called it that, of course, because that would have involved admitting that something from the East might actually be helpful. But the practice was real. One sleep manual recommended that just before bed, you repeat the same nonsense word over and over in your mind, something like Broly or Calipuff, until no other thoughts could sneak in. The idea was to bore your brain into submission, to drown your anxious inner monologue in a soothing puddle of monotony. And if that didn't work, you could try visual discipline. This involved mentally picturing an object, say, an apple, and rotating it slowly in your mind, examining it from every angle, like a mental screensaver. The longer you held focus, the sooner your mind would tire. At least, that was the promise. In reality, many people fell asleep halfway through the imaginary fruit tour, which, admittedly, was kind of the point. Historians still argue whether these techniques were truly effective or merely a precursor to the modern wellness industry, but either way, they were a huge hit. Sleep as purity became a cultural obsession, and self-mastery was praised as a mark of moral superiority. Now here's where things get a little strange. Religious guidance was often roped into the bedtime routine. Clergymen published pamphlets instructing faithful citizens to review their day's sins each night and offer silent prayers for forgiveness, with the promise that a cleansed soul would sleep more soundly. One particularly dramatic preacher even claimed that the guilty man sleeps in thunder, but the righteous snoozes in dew. Poetic, yes. Calming? Not so much if you were 12 years old and hadn't yet confessed to breaking your neighbor's window with a stick. And then there were the worry journals. Victorians believed writing your fears down might remove them from your mind. You were encouraged to keep a small leather-bound book beside your bed, where you could record anxious thoughts, pressing dilemmas, and cryptic dreams, not to solve them, just to externalize them. Place your burden on the page, one manual said, and leave it there until morning. Imagine a whole generation of people whispering their miseries to paper just before blowing out their gas lamps. It's both beautiful and heartbreaking. In aristocratic households, some took this concept even further. They employed bedtime listeners, Servants trained to sit quietly and nod as their masters whispered their thoughts aloud, purging their minds like a bedtime confessional. If that sounds awkward, it was. The job was often rotated, because no one wanted to hear Lord Basil moan about his existential dread every single night. You're probably wondering, was there any science in all this? A bit. The idea that racing thoughts and stress hormones disrupt sleep isn't exactly wrong, but the way Victorians approached it, with guilt and ritual and moral judgment, was dramatic, to say the least. Take, for example, the concept of mental overfeeding. Some physicians claimed that reading novels before bed, especially thrilling ones by authors like Wilkie Collins, could stir the mind into such a frenzy that you'd remain wide-eyed until dawn. The cure? Reading something painfully dull instead. Government reports were suggested, or encyclopedias. One manual even recommended the minutes of local parish meetings, which are exactly as exciting as they sound. It wasn't just fiction they feared, though. Some warned against late-night chess matches, theological debates, or passionate poetry recitations, because clearly nothing ruins sleep like a heated sonnet duel. You begin to see the shape of Victorian life more clearly now. Everything, even rest, had rules, and those rules weren't just practical, they were moralized, wrapped in shame or pride or duty. Even dreaming was suspect. A lively dream life might be a sign of emotional imbalance, or worse, secret sin. Dream journals were scrutinized like medical records. Too many dreams about flying, a fragile ego, too many dreams about drowning, repressed guilt, too many dreams about Queen Victoria attending your wedding? Well, maybe lay off the brandy before bed. It wasn't just about sleep. It was about control of the body, the mind, the soul. Victorians longed to master their inner world the same way they tried to master the outer one, with discipline, order, and precisely fluffed pillows. And so tonight, as your thoughts drift toward your own mental clutter, the grocery list, the unread messages, the thing you said that haunts you like a squeaky floorboard, you can smile, just a little, knowing that Victorians did the same. And their solutions were often just as messy as yours. But perhaps there's something gently useful in their rituals. The slow scribble of a worry journal. The imagined apple turning quietly in space. The nonsense word echoing softly, like waves lapping a shore. You don't have to master your thoughts. Just learn to sit beside them a little more gently, and let the night take care of the rest. Somewhere in the shadows of your half-dreaming mind, you begin to realize Victorians weren't just afraid of sleeplessness. They feared what it meant and what it might cause, because to them, insomnia wasn't just a nuisance. It was a potential gateway to madness. Tonight, you sink deeper into the padded halls of Victorian sleep clinics. A world where the sleepless were sometimes sequestered, studied, and, occasionally, softly restrained for their own good. It begins, of course, with the rise of rest homes and private asylums, not the Gothic haunted ones with flickering gaslights and cold iron beds, although those certainly existed too, but genteel establishments tucked away in the countryside with floral wallpaper, creaking oak staircases, and an unsettling number of wicker chairs. You're a patient now, remember. You've come here because you haven't slept in 3 weeks. Your hands tremble over tea, and your eyes look like they've seen the ghost of your own sanity. The doctor, in his impeccable waistcoat, assures you it's nothing a little quiet won't fix, and maybe some cod liver oil. Inside these establishments, the cure for insomnia wasn't just pills or potions, it was routine. Your day is broken into segments so structured they make military drills look whimsical. Wake at 6. Tea at 7. Walk at 8. Rest in the drawing room by 9. No excitement. No visitors who might cause you distress. Your letters are screened for emotional content. The only approved reading material is the Psalms, a gardening manual, or Pilgrim's Progress. And bedtime? That's the main event. At precisely 8:30 p.m., the lights dim. An attendant brings you a lukewarm glass of milk, sweetened with opium if you're lucky, and you're tucked in like a child. Not metaphorically, literally. A nurse pulls the sheets tight around you, murmurs something soothing about dreams, and quietly clicks the door shut behind her. In some clinics, padded sleeping jackets are employed. Not for punishment, but to keep your hands from wandering in the night. A gentleman mustn't toss and turn after all. There's one odd little gem from this era, a treatment called sleep compression. The idea was counterintuitive. Instead of letting you lie in bed all night hoping for sleep, they'd limit the time you were allowed to sleep, forcing your body into a kind of desperation. You'd only be allowed into bed for a few hours a night, and if you didn't fall asleep, too bad. You'd sit up straight in a chair the rest of the night. Over time, your brain would give in from sheer exhaustion. Does that sound like sleep torture? Well, yes, it does. Historians still argue whether these clinics were a sign of progressive care or just another soft cage for people society didn't understand. After all, these rest homes weren't accessible to everyone. If you were poor, you didn't get a sleep retreat. You got a cold room, a judgmental priest, and possibly a bottle of laudanum if the pharmacist liked you. But if you were wealthy enough, you could check into places like The Retreat in York or Craig Lockhart Hydropathic Hospital in Scotland. These establishments offered not just rest, but a kind of curated silence. And water. So much water. Because here's another Victorian favorite: hydrotherapy for the sleepless. If you complained of insomnia, a doctor might prescribe a drip sheet, a wet cloth, chilled to near icy temperatures, wrapped tightly around your body like a burrito of despair. The shock was supposed to calm your nervous system, or, at the very least, give you something else to focus on. There were also warm baths, long soaks in clawfoot tubs filled with mineral-rich waters and lavender oil. These were the kinder, gentler siblings of the ice wraps. Sometimes, if you were very lucky, your bed was wheeled directly next to the bath. You'd go from tub to tuck-in under a minute. A sleepy human ravioli. There's a certain irony in all this, of course, because while these clinics and regimens were designed to cure insomnia, they often created a level of stress and rigidity that made sleep even harder. Imagine knowing you'll be judged on your sleep performance every morning. That's enough pressure to keep anyone wide-eyed till dawn. Still, there's a strange, slow charm to these places. The meticulous schedules, the quiet corridors, the distant ticking of grandfather clocks echoing off wallpapered halls. You can almost feel yourself walking those passageways in slippers, the hush of polished floors beneath your feet. And now, a small sidebar, an often forgotten footnote in the story of sleep treatment: dream observation. In some of the more experimental clinics, Your dreams were documented, not by you, but by your doctor. He'd sit with you each morning and ask you to recount your dreams in exacting detail, scribbling away in his little leather notebook. A lion? Interesting. Chased by water? Troubling? Floating through a cathedral in a nightgown? Definitely maternal issues. These reports were cross-referenced with your daily behaviors, creating what one particularly ambitious doctor called a map of the nocturnal psyche. Spoiler, the map led nowhere, but it was very nicely illustrated. And if your dreams were deemed too dark, you might be prescribed spiritual reading before sleep, hymns, morality tales, even sermons, a way to cleanse your subconscious. Think of it as dream scrubbing. All of this points to one peculiar truth. For Victorians, sleep was not a simple switch to flip. It was a full-body opera. You were the conductor, the performer, and the audience. Every step mattered. Every action intentional. And so, in your quiet bed, somewhere between the crisp linen and the ticking clock, you begin to understand. They weren't just trying to sleep. They were trying to be worthy of sleep, to prove, night after night, that they'd earned it, that they'd conquered every distraction, soothed every nerve, balanced every humor, that they were disciplined enough to rest, because for the Victorians, sleep wasn't just rest, it was redemption. By now, your eyelids feel heavier than a velvet curtain in an old Victorian theater, but the show must go on, or rather, drift on. As you settle deeper under your imaginary embroidered quilt, let's tiptoe into one of the most peculiar intersections of insomnia and innovation: the rise of the Victorian sleep gadget. Because, of course, they had gadgets. These were the same people who built mechanical songbirds, automated tea kettles, and something called a chocolate churner operated entirely by foot pedals. If you had a problem, the Victorian answer was always, "Have we tried building a contraption?" For the sleepless, the answer came in bizarre little boxes, clunky brass devices, and gear-filled mechanisms promising instant repose. You, poor insomniac, have tried the sleep clinics and the tinctures, but maybe what you really need is machine-assisted slumber. Let's start with the mechanical rocking bed. Yes, exactly what it sounds like. Invented by sleep-obsessed tinkerers in the 1870s, this glorious monstrosity gently rocked the user back and forth like a giant adult cradle. Picture a normal bed, now mounted on a pendulum system of springs and counterweights, and let it swing side to side in a slow, seasick rhythm. You'd climb in, pull a cord, and the device would rock you for up to 45 minutes. Allegedly, this motion replicated the soothing lull of infancy. Realistically, it also caused more than a few people to get motion sick in their own sheets. Still, many swore by it. Not to be outdone, another inventor patented the Somno chair, a recliner equipped with ticking metronomes embedded in the armrests. These produced a steady rhythmic click, like an ever-patient grandfather clock whispering, "Sleep, now. Sleep, now." You'd sit in it, trying not to be unnerved by the unblinking mechanical eyes carved into the chair's backrest. Yes, real feature. One fringe variant included a clockwork lullaby box, an early mashup of music box and hypnosis device. When wound, it played slow, droning melodies in a minor key, overlaid with faint clicking sounds that, to your exhausted mind, might sound like the polite footsteps of someone definitely watching you sleep. Still not dozing? Then let's turn to the big guns, gas-regulating pillows. These peculiar pillows weren't just soft, they were scented, not with lavender, but with a slow leak of gases like carbon dioxide or ether. The idea was to create a hypnotic atmosphere around your face. The practical result? You inhaled just enough to feel woozy, but hopefully not enough to pass out permanently. Unsurprisingly, these fell out of favor quickly, after several less than refreshing mornings. Historians still argue whether these gas pillow designs were sincerely medicinal or just elaborate Victorian pranks. Some patents suggest serious intent. Others, well, they're hard to take seriously when the inventor also tried to patent aromatic knee pads. But let's not forget the rise of bedroom architecture for sleep hygiene. Yes, even your room had to be optimized. Victorians were obsessed with airflow, temperature, and wall color. Sleep guides recommended blue walls for tranquility, north-facing windows for cooler nights, and bare wooden floors to discourage dust devils, which they feared might stimulate insomnia by agitating the ether. No one really knew what ether was, but it was definitely agitated. Your bed had to be placed no less than 1 meter from any wall, preferably aligned east-west, with your head toward the rising sun. You were also warned never to keep mirrors uncovered at night. They were thought to reflect not just light, but energy, scattering your dreams before they could settle. Sound wild? Well, wait until you hear about the sleep helmet. Crafted from padded leather and lined with quilted velvet, this invention wrapped snugly around the head, muffling outside noise and blocking light. A strap under the chin kept it secure, and some versions even included a small compartment near the ears filled with dried rose petals or chamomile. You looked ridiculous. But you slept. Or, more often, you sweated profusely, removed it in a panic, and slept bareheaded like a peasant. These devices reflect not just a desperation to sleep, but a belief in sleep as a mechanical process. The Victorians, ever the engineers of life, thought that if they could just build the right apparatus, they could force the body to obey. That sleep was a system to be hacked, like winding a pocket watch, or programming a steam-powered brain. Some of these ideas weren't entirely wrong. A few gadgets inspired modern sleep aids. Weighted blankets, for example? Originally inspired by Victorian pressure wraps used in clinics. White noise machines, distant descendants of the ticking somno chair, even the sleep hygiene movement. The idea that your habits, bedroom setup, and routine impact your rest has roots in the obsessive room layouts and morning charts of Victorian sleep manuals. Still, there's something charmingly naive about it all. As if the answer to a tortured mind was always one more spring, one more dial, one more puff of vaporized lavender, a belief that you could build your way out of anxiety. But here's the secret: no Victorian gadget ever quite cracked. Sleep, as you well know, is a slippery thing. The more you chase it, the faster it runs. And maybe, just maybe, you're better off without a rocking bed or a puffing pillow helmet. Just you, your breath, and the soft ticking of some imaginary clock in the distance. Rocking not your body, but your thoughts. Back and forth. Drifting. Slowing. Dreaming not of sleep machines, but of something far more delicate. Like silence. You're lying there now, perhaps not quite asleep, but no longer wide awake either. As we drift into the final stretch of this long, candlelit corridor through Victorian insomnia. You've heard the rattling pills, the steaming jars, the seaweed-infused baths, and even the helmet lined with flower petals. But before we truly dim the lantern, there's one more room to visit, one last door to open. And inside? The ultimate irony. Because after all the tonics and gadgets and rigid bedroom rituals, some Victorians came to a truly baffling conclusion, that the only real cure for sleeplessness was simply to stop trying so hard. It was called the passive sleep theory. This idea emerged in the late 1890s and early 1900s, as psychologists and philosophers began pushing back against medical overreach. They claimed that insomnia wasn't a disease, but a condition of the modern mind. Racing thoughts, tight schedules, social pressure. You know, the stuff we still blame today, except they dressed it up in Latin. The theory argued that you couldn't force sleep. You had to invite it. Let it arrive like an old friend, not like a delivery you track obsessively from your doorstep. Instead of gas pillows or opium-laced syrup, the recommendation was this: lie still. Let your thoughts wander. Don't even try to sleep. Just drift. This might sound laughably simple after the brass helmets and metronome chairs, but it was quietly revolutionary. It gave people permission to let go. Imagine yourself now as one of those hopeful converts, lying flat on your horsehair mattress, not forcing your eyelids to close, but letting them flutter at their own pace. Your body still, the fire low. You're no longer battling wakefulness like an enemy. You're simply waiting, breathing, watching the shadows on the ceiling ripple. You become, in a way, your own remedy. But of course, not everyone bought into this. Some Victorians insisted that surrendering to sleeplessness was a sign of moral decay. The body is a temple, one wrote, and to let it idle in sleepless stupor is an offense to its sacred machinery. Yes, because clearly nothing screams sacred machinery like strapping a gas canister to your face. Historians still argue whether this passive sleep movement was truly effective, or just another fad in the long parade of nighttime delusions. But it did mark a shift from the mechanical to the psychological, from gadgets to gentleness, from urgency to surrender. And maybe, in the end, that's the one lesson these insomnia cures leave behind. You can brew the tea, adjust the mattress, measure the light, and still lie awake thinking about tomorrow's laundry. You can take 3 sips of a laudanum and lemon elixir and still toss and turn with thoughts of missed trains and unspoken words. Because sleep isn't something you get. It's something you allow. That's why one of the final strange remedies you would have heard whispered about in Victorian circles was this: sleep by imagination. Yes, dream first, then sleep. In this technique, which appeared in a fringe 1899 health manual, you were told to lie on your back and vividly imagine a quiet countryside. Picture a fence, a slow-moving sheep, a gentle river, a sky turning from pink to violet. Let yourself become the character in your imagined dream, already half asleep in a story of your own making. You may have tried something similar yourself, conjuring up a cozy scene to keep your mind from spiraling. And the Victorians, in their own overstated, deeply awkward, faintly unhinged way, were trying to do the same thing. Yes, they put too much faith in medicine that tasted like fireplace ash. Yes, they believed sleep could be won with the right contraption, but at the heart of it, they just wanted what you want: a little quiet, a little peace, a night without counting the ceiling cracks. And now, as your breathing slows, you realize maybe they were right about one thing. Sleep is a ritual, but not one of noise or urgency. A quiet, rhythmic ritual, like listening to the rain drum softly on the window, or the hush of fabric as you turn gently in bed, or the way your thoughts slowly slip apart like pages falling closed. Wind down begins below. Let it all fade now. The rattling of glass bottles, the hissing of gas lamps, the creak of those elaborate wooden beds. Even the weight of your own body seems to ease, softening into the mattress like flour sifted into warm water. You're no longer in a Victorian bedroom, not really. You're floating somewhere between here and there, just far enough from thought to no longer chase it. The air around you is still, gentle, nothing to do. No tinctures to swallow, no clocks to wind, no steps to follow. You've done enough. Tonight, your only job is this: rest. Let your mind be as loose as a thread unraveling from a woolen coat. Let your breath move in waves, slow and shallow. In, out, like the sea remembering the shore. If a thought rises, let it pass like the faint flicker of candlelight behind your eyelids. You are safe. You are still. You are no longer a Victorian insomniac searching for answers in a bottle or a ticking chair. You are just here. And somewhere between the hush of silence and the rhythm of breath, you begin to forget where you are at all. Drift now. Sleep has already found you. Sweet dreams.